Hi everyone, welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, a podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters, and enthusiasts like Josh and myself. I am, of course, Dan. With me, of course, is Josh.
Happy New Year, everybody.
And welcome to Studio 54 of the Earthdawn Survival Guide. Sorry, I had to get a little reference in there, because we are at 54. I can count this time. So 54 episodes deep. How do you like them apples?
I like that. We are here in year 2.
Yes. Beginning of our second year, because we lapped it the first time around. So,
yeah.
And yes, Happy New Year, because come on, 2021. 2020 has sucked enough in every way possible. So let's get to the better times as fast as we possibly can.
We're clawing back daylight, so at least in the Northern Hemisphere. So there we go.
Yeah. Working on it. So
what do we have going on this week, Dan?
So today we're going to talk about everything quizzical and metallurgical, because we are going to talk about a couple of emails we got in during the break. And we are also going to talk about Forge Weapon. And that's going to be it, because that's going to take up all the air in the room.
We're going to open up the new year. We're going to talk about the thing that I have said that needs talking about, but didn't want to talk about in the midst of any other discussions because it would cover everything.
Yes.
There was a recent question on the Earthdawn Guild Facebook page.
Yep.
about Forge Weapon, and I'm not necessarily going to address anything specifically from that post in this episode.
But it did inspire the conversation.
But it did, because basically I said, I thought I had talked about it in the Weaponsmith episode, and they said, well, you touched on it briefly, but basically said you didn't want to get into it. I said, well, I'll put it on the list. We'll make it this first episode of the year. I have gone through and I've actually made notes. We have actually prepped
a little bit.
So that, a little bit.
If you can call frantic 10 minutes of looking at books.
I have certainly done more prep than I typically do. I've got a document open up here.
Absolutely.
On my computer screen with all of the relevant game stat notes for the various editions, because all of that ties into my 40-minute rant about, not a rant per se, but a 40-minute history lesson and why choices were made and yada, yada, yada.
So episode Studio 54, air quotes, the weeds. We're going to get into the weeds today on Forge Weapon.
Yes, but first we have a couple of emails.
But first we have some quick emails. So, honestly enough. So, all things quizzical. First thing is from Matthew. Hi, Matthew. Hello, guys. I'm sorry for your loss, Josh. If there's anything I can do, please let me know. I want to say that I love that Dan was recording the Legends. I am in the camp that I hope we get more episodes of them, minus the tragedy for the reason we're getting them. You two are doing a great job, and I am so glad that this podcast exists.
Well,
thank you, Matthew. So are we.
We're going to have another Legends episode after this one, because we're still in the midst of holidays. Recording weirdness. We decided that rather than try and do 2 episodes here, we're actually recording this on New Year's Eve. Rather than
doing it right.
Rather than doing 2 episodes tonight and going late, we'll just do the one. We'll do another bit of Legends, which I don't know, will it wrap up Legends of Earthdawn Volume 1? Will that one be the last bit? Or
no, because there's 30 in there. I think I'll be able to get through 28 of them, because I released one earlier that I'm not going to bother to redo, Lilaria's Mirror. So that one's already out on a tail end of a podcast somewhere way back when. So I'm skipping that one on purpose. I think I just skipped that one last time.
Okay, I think the show notes from last week's would have had it, and I had it in there because I didn't actually listen to the episode. I just went, where does he pick up? What's the last one? And just went through the table of contents and listed all of those. So
my fault. Meant to tell you.
Nope. So, that's fine.
That's hidden.
That's
it's
on
hidden
me.
treasure somewhere on another podcast. But no, that'll be there
early
somewhere.
Ones. It's one of the
it's like 20s, early something.
It might even be earlier than that. But anyway,
maybe. Anyway, so yeah, it won't quite finish off. Won't quite finish off Legends of Earth, Legends, but it'll be delving into the Book of Exploration after that. So there's 50 of them total. But I plan on doing all seven podcasts of 7 stories each for 49, since Lilaria's Mirror was already released. So that's my plan. Thank you, Matthew.
Anyway, yes, thank you. Dan had been kind of saying in our chats that this was just to fill space so that we could sort of maintain a consistent release schedule. But he wasn't sure how people would feel. And clearly, not only from Matthew, but a couple of other people have mentioned on Twitter and Facebook and whatnot that they have actually enjoyed those things in there as well.
It's a brief respite from the regular podcast, but it was only to fill space and feed the listeners, not viewers, feed the listeners while Josh was handling life one step at a time. So
yes,
happy to provide content, but we'd rather not have
because it is just Dan, then he can record it whenever. We don't have to work out schedules for us to both be available.
Yeah. So thank you, Matthew. I appreciate the feedback. I'm glad you're enjoying them. More to come. On to Brian. Hi there. Just a quick thought on some of the problems with the cavalryman discipline and how they can be used in more campaigns. To me, a lot of the problems go away if you stop thinking of them as exclusively horse cavalry. Obviously, windlings have been avoiding that concern for a long time, but consider that Hatawa are suitable for mounts for orcs, humans, elves, and dwarves, are natural climbers, and can jump quite an impressive distance. Frankly, if you bring a Hatawa into an abandoned care or similar, they are probably better able to navigate it than their name-giver friend, stairs and all. Dwarf cavalrymen also have the option of the Trojan, or the Trojan, another highly mobile mount with similar characteristics, and it is even shorter, so you can ride it in shorter hallways. Neither of these mounts options are extremely difficult to come by either, and I would say that in the event that you don't have room to charge, I suspect that either of those mounts will do better than a horse as well, which will help compensate for not being able to use charge. There will still be some scenarios where the mount won't be able to go, like an audience with some sort of government official, but then again, it isn't like you're any worse off than a warrior in that case, and you may in fact be better off. Cavalryman is not by any means primarily a social discipline, but compared to a warrior, they're looking pretty good. Now, granted, this still leaves Troll and Obsidian characters in a bit of a lurch, but it still means that your options are far more open than I think most people give it credit for. So, just a thought, if you're itching to play a cavalryman, but you're worried that your mount won't handle going down a narrow flight of stairs or up a cliff, try choosing a mount that is more suited for adventuring in those regions. The idea of the cavalryman may be closely associated with a horse, but that doesn't mean that your cavalryman must ride one. All regards, Brian.
Yes, those are some great points and ones that have not come up in any of the cavalryman discussions that have been weaving their way back and forth through this show.
What?
The Trojan and Hutawa are both pretty respectable mounts.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a character that is capable of using them. The one downside, potentially, of both of those mounts is that their diet is carnivorous. They're both sort of carnivorous animals.
Yeah.
And so consequently, that does mean that feeding them is a little bit more expensive than it is for a traditional horse or Grand Lane.
Yeah.
And the Windling mounts, their diets are a little bit different as well compared to a horse, but they're a lot smaller and so don't tend to eat as much. I know in the player's guide in the equipment chapter at the back, the tables, I think, do show the feeding costs for the various mounts, and I'm pretty sure that both the Hutawa and the Trojan are more expensive compared to their herbivorous herbivore counterparts. But yeah, absolutely. The Trojan and the Hutawa. I have a soft spot in my heart for Trojan.
Yeah. So player's guide, page 440, mounts table, feed cost.
So what is a standard horse cost?
So draft horse, or let's go riding horse. They're all 5
riding
copper.
horse.
Doesn't matter. They're all 5 copper
that's
all horses.
Per day, I think is what it's daily cost.
Daily cost.
Okay.
And then the Hatawa's 8 copper pieces.
Okay, that's actually not that much more expensive.
And the Trojan is 2 silver.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's basically
the Trojan is the cat.
Yeah. Horses are 5 cents. Hatawa's 8 cents, and a Trojan therefore is 20 cents. So something like that.
So so the Trojan, which is the cat, which is the one that I am partial to.
Oh, they're awesome.
Is the more expensive because I think the Hutawa actually their diet is a little bit more specialized, but still kind of partially herbivore and whatnot. What are the because you've got the table right there. What are the Zoke and Q
That's what I was laughing for. The Q is 2 copper pieces, and the Zoke is 1 copper piece. So they're very inexpensive because they are smaller.
They're very expensive.
But since you have, like a horse can graze on grass and hay and things like that. So that's not hard to do. So wilderness survival as a skill for your character wouldn't be too bad to help feed that animal if you're not buying rations for it. But if you have something that is, as you said, carnivorous, hunting would be the skill you want to have to go get small game to feed them. Or let them go hunt. That's what they do. That's their instinct.
Yeah, the point that those two, what are traditionally sort of thought of as dwarven mounts, are much better suited in some respects to care diving type things because they're a little bit more mobile and jumping and climbing and whatnot. The other one to look at, although it's a bit more along the lines of the horse, is to look at like the riding goat, which is more like the big kind of like mountain goat or mountain sheep type of thing, rather than what most people think of as a goat, which is a billy goat. Those are really good climbers as well, and probably a lot more stable in what you would maybe see in a care environment, but because they are hoofed as opposed to paws like a cat, which is both the Hutawa and the Trojan, might be a little bit thing. But yeah, absolutely fantastic points to be raised, and a lot of the discussion has been focused on horses.
Mm-hmm.
But those two mounts are definitely worth looking into if you're going to have a game. If you want to play a cavalryman, the other thing to look at is the movement rates for those. And those are not in the player's guide. Those are in the game master's guide.
Yes.
Because of the requirement for charge requires the mount to move a certain distance in order for you to use it. Mm-hmm. It may be that if the movement rate for those animals is also smaller than it is for a horse, that makes using charge easier.
Yeah.
Because you can use it in a little bit more enclosed areas. But all fantastic points and great things to bring up. And yes, that doesn't do anything for trolls or obsidian.
No.
Or orcs or anybody who wants to go with the really big strong mounts like a dire or a Thundra Beast or something along those lines. Those are big boys, and those
are still going to have some limitations,
but sweet. But yeah, that is definitely something you need to work with the game master about if you're going to have either of those.
I did once upon a time for Demon World, I did stat out a bighorn sheep as a mount. What other people in parts of the country call a ram on the mountaintops where they clash horns, the curved horns. I did stat one of those out. I have the numbers somewhere. So one of these days, if Josh has some time, he'll look over the stats and, see if they're okay. But other than that.
Well, that's I think sort of what I'm talking about with the riding goat is like one of those bighorn sheep, like that kind of scale of animal.
Yeah, because I think I put in there that their charge actually was like half the distance needed because they do build up some power and actually can ram, the opponent instead of just something else. But anyway, it's been 5 years since I looked at that stuff, so don't quote me on anything I just said. Although you can play it back to me and I will deny it left and right. So, okay. Thank you, Matthew and Brian, for the emails. We figure it's pretty light on emails because of the holidays and or the lack of content we've put out. So now we can generate a whole new slew of emails because we're about to get into the weeds 15 minutes into the podcast. You hear that threshing noise? That's the sound of us walking into the deep, tall grass trying to find the golf ball. So, okay. About Forge Blade. How many iterations have there been?
Forge Weapon. Okay. So,
not including Forge Armor. That's a whole different thing.
Yeah.
Not touching armor today.
Forge Armor, I'll preface with Forge Armor. Forge Armor is pretty straightforward. Forge Armor has never run into the difficulties that Forge Blade / Forge Weapon has.
Mm-hmm.
I will use the two interchangeably. I will not say both every time. So if I say one, assume I am, unless I'm referring to a specific edition, assume that I mean Forge Weapon.
Yeah, so maybe the whole Forge item from when it started. But
Forge Armor never really had the problems that Forge Weapon did, primarily because Forge Armor in earlier editions did not become available until much, much later.
Oh, yeah.
It was a warden or master tier talent in first edition, and I don't think it dropped down to be more accessible until third.
It was like it was like 8th circle to get Forge armor or something like that, or even higher. It was
even higher in original editions.
It was nuts.
And so it never really showed up. So I guess the way that I'm going to approach this is
okay. I was going to say, so what prompted the discussion on, since we didn't cover it in the Weaponsmith episode, and it was brought up in the Earthdawn Guild Facebook page, what was the question proffered so we can kind of give context to why today?
Well,
let's start there.
Yeah,
I'll play interviewer.
Without getting into the specifics, because I don't have the post up in front of me, and I don't want to go digging for right now. But it was mainly sort of, there were some aspects of the questions that were being asked. Why? Because it was talking about them in context of third edition and why certain changes were made, and a question about it no longer being balanced and that sort of thing.
Yes. And
I think to understand why the choices were made for the current 4th edition version of Forge Weapon, it helps to have a historical perspective on where it started and the various changes that were made from edition to edition and why those were made.
So how we got to now.
How we got from then to now, because there are, I cannot think off the top of my head of any talents that saw as wide a variety of changes to them over the course of the various editions. Like, some talents have seen some changes, but a lot of them saw a change or two that kind of settled into their final version with only some minor tweaks. Like, for example, Taunt, which we talked about with the Swordmaster episode, which started off providing a penalty to the target equal to the talent rank for a number of rounds equal to the talent rank. That fairly quickly got scaled back to the penalty is still equal to the rank, but the duration got scaled back pretty heavily. That the duration is based off of the number of successes, or that got flipped around, or something to that effect. That was something that kind of settled into its more or less final form fairly rapidly. Forge Weapon, from its earliest days of Forge Blade, saw 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different versions, depending on how you count it. So, first edition, original, 1993, first edition core book.
Yes.
Forge Weapon, Forge Blade, as it was called then. The weaponsmith works on the item for a week. The description does not actually provide any kind of guidance as to how much time needs to be spent per day or over the course of the week or something like that. It just says they work on it for a week. The difficulty number for the test is equal to the weapon's damage step. So a broadsword, which is at step 5, is a difficulty number of 5. There is a use limit in first edition, and this is the only time that this actually shows up, is it can a given weaponsmith, a character may use Forge Blade on a single weapon a number of times equal to their rank in Forge Blade. This limit includes failed uses of the talent on the weapon. So there is a hard limit on how many times you can try to improve any given weapon.
Yeah.
And there is nothing in the rules in the original first edition book that have any kind of duration on it, that once a bonus is provided to a weapon by the use of the talent, it is permanent.
But you can't do any melee weapon with it.
Yeah, you can do any melee weapon with it, and regardless of the result of the test, each successful test only provides a plus one bonus.
Yep. Regardless of how
regardless of how good your roll is, it only provides a +1 bonus. There are no special rules or special cases for any kind of limit to the maximum amount of bonus that can be provided. There is no special rules or guidance in the first edition book on using it on magic weapons, on thread weapons.
No.
So that basically it is a sort of universal bonus. It provides a permanent bonus from the weaponsmith onto the weapon to make it better. There's
That's first edition.
That's first edition as it is. That's okay. Like
Yeah,
it's not perfect, but it's actually, I mean, if you look at fourth edition, you will go, oh, hey, there's a rather strong similarity to that.
Yeah.
Part of the reason
it's not game breaking yet.
Well, so two things then happened where we sort of get into version 1.5 of Forge Blade. And these were both introduced in the Adept's Way sourcebook in the game information chapter at the back talking about weaponsmiths.
So there fast forward 2 years to 1995.
Yes, fast forward a couple of years. There are two limits. There are two things that are added on to the Forge Blade talent that kind of start the ball rolling in terms of all of the changes that would come subsequently. Those two. You've got the book right there. I've got the notes, but go ahead. You've got the book right there. What are those two limitations?
This is my only chance to speak this entire episode because Josh has a rant later. I'm kidding. Just kidding. So step number limits on forging blade and forging armor. A weaponsmith may never improve a weapon's damage step by more than the weapon's original damage step. So the best you can do is double it. Just for clear, right there.
And so a broadsword, which is normally step 5,
can only ever go to a maximum step 10.
Can only get up to a maximum of step 10.
And the same thing for armor ratings and mystic armor ratings. Of armor may never be increased by more than the armor's original ratings. So best you can ever do is double. That's it. Then,
so that's the first limit, and we'll circle back to that in a moment because that starts one of the things.
Which again maybe could be game breaking, but not really because there's not a lot of weapons above step 6 or 7 really. So there you are. Okay, so second one is improving magical weapons and armor. This rule is the difficulty number for the tests using either of these talents, forge weapon, forge armor, is the spell defense of the magical item rather than the damage step or the armor rating.
Right. And there's another piece of that.
Yep. In the case of legendary magical treasure, improving the item requires an excellent or extraordinary success on the appropriate talent test. An average or good success neither improves nor harms the item, but a failed test may weaken or even destroy the item at Game Master's discretion.
So basically what that means is that not only is the difficulty number different than it is for mundane items, right? Mm-hmm. Rather than it being a difficulty...
Target number of the damage step.
Yeah, like a difficulty 5 for a broadsword. If you've got a threaded broadsword, a legendary broadsword, that doesn't have any damage bonuses on it yet. It doesn't matter, actually, whether it does or not. That difficulty number is equal to the spell defense of the item. And not only that, you need to get higher than that base difficulty.
Yes.
Okay, so it made with the possibility that if you chum your roll, you could screw up the item.
Yep.
So this pair of options ends up doing a couple of things.
Like monkeys with wrenches.
So there's a couple of things that happens. One, it makes it really, really difficult to provide damage bonuses to magic items, to magic weapons. Mm-hmm. Okay? It's possible to get some on there, but for the most part, and in most games, I think you're going to see people, because of the potential risk of damage to the weapon, at Game Master's discretion, but because it's in the rules, people are like, oh, well, I don't want to risk damaging Purifier by trying to add additional damage on top of it.
Yes.
Okay. So what you're looking at for most weapons is you're limited to whatever damage bonus the weapon provides. And because a lot of times thread weapons provide other effects beyond increased damage, right? So you're looking at a thread broadsword that might only end up with with a total of +2 or +3 damage to it from thread ranks that are on it. Okay?
Yeah.
Whereas a normal off-the-rack broadsword can be taken to a weaponsmith who can get it up to a +5. So a total damage step of 10, whereas the threaded broadsword only does a damage step of 8. Now, the threaded broadsword may provide physical defense bonuses, may provide other special effects. Like, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that the thread weapon can provide to you as a character.
Whole lot more booyah.
Potentially, than raw damage, but gamers, broadly speaking, really like focusing on those big damage numbers, right?
Yeah.
I remember the arguments that I had back in the D&D days of, oh, well, Fireball only does 6d6 damage.
Yeah.
Compared to a fighter does this. And I'm like, well, if you look at the potential damage output, Fireball is not the spell you want to look at. You want to look at a summon spell that summons a creature that then fights alongside you and potentially does more damage
than just
over
Fireball.
the course of its duration than the Fireball can in a single round. But anyway, that's irrelevant, but that's the sort of like people focusing on one particular thing and getting that number as maximum as possible.
Welcome to the weeds.
Yeah. So you start having... So yes, there is a limit that is placed on mundane items compared to what the original first edition rules as written could be.
Yeah.
But it also limited thread items in a way that I think was a little bit to their detriment. The question becomes, well, why would I want to... If my goal as a warrior is to deal as much damage as possible, that may not actually be the thing, but a lot of people like, I hit things with my sword. My sword should do as much damage as possible. Why would I want a threaded sword that only does step 8 damage at its maximum when I could get a normal broadsword forged up to do step 10? Yeah. Right?
Those 2 extra steps make a difference.
Not a huge...
Potentially.
But yeah, like, you want the bigger numbers. The other thing that limit on the maximum damage kind of did is that because the weaponsmith's limitations on use, including failed uses, was their rank, there comes a point where if you have a high enough rank in the talent, a weaponsmith can... or you get multiple weaponsmiths working on an item that basically there is no effective reason why regular weapons and armor, or regular weapons... I don't want to talk about armor too much because it may have had these issues, but they never materialized because the talent was, relatively speaking, so rare.
Yes.
But you have a situation like in the Thrall Source book, the first edition Thrall Source book, the regular frontline infantry of the Thrallic army are all equipped with maximum forged broadswords. That basically you've got the regular troops walking around with...
Step 10 weapons.
Because Thrall has enough of an industrial base, has enough of a population of weaponsmiths paid for by the crown to basically do nothing but improve the weapons of their soldiers.
All day and all night.
Basically, you start off with... basically you kind of start this arms race where, you go and and because it's permanent, you go and you come across even if you aren't actively going out and ambushing Thrallic troops to steal their weapons, you come across a group of a Thrallic soldier or something who might have died and his weapon is there and you suddenly have a step 10 broadsword.
Yeah.
So what happens is the problem, as I see it, is not the damage step that is potentially available to within the game. I don't think that is actually what the problem was. I think the problem is the permanent effect of that bonus. That warps the setting in certain ways. Rightly or wrongly. So that is the understanding that situation that we had in the setting at the tail end of first edition with, the Thrallic army are equipped with maximum forged weapons.
Yeah.
Maximum forged mundane weapons have higher damage step numbers than you are going to find compared to most thread items. And the difficulty of forging thread items to get that bonus above and beyond what they might have as far as their damage step goes, just kind of puts a situation that has people feeling like Forge Blade is not balanced. Okay? So that's the situation where we're at. First edition shuts down in 1999-2000.
Yeah.
Living Room Games comes along with second edition, and one of the things that they try and do with second edition is take a look at some of the talents that are broadly recognized as troublesome or broken or whatever amongst at least the online fan base at the time, Taunt being one of them. Forge Blade is another one that is targeted for revision.
Big D, big U, big H. Yeah, gonna happen.
So second edition. So here is the Living Room Games version of Forge Blade. The duration, how much time the weaponsmith needs to work on it, is clarified, that they need to work on it for 8 hours within a week. So that can be an hour, like an hour and a half a day. It could be 4 hours over the course of 2 days. As long as you cover that period of time, you can use the talent.
You can cram all 8 hours in the last day like you do for a final.
Right. Okay. The difficulty number for it doesn't change at all. Okay, it's still the damage step of the weapon. It includes the limit that was the maximum damage bonus limit that was introduced in Adept's Way. So you can still only go the maximum of double the weapon's base damage step.
Yeah.
It no longer has the usage limit. Okay, so there's, unlike the hard limit where the weaponsmith could only use the talent against a given item a number of times equal to their rank.
Mm-hmm.
That limit is gone. So a weaponsmith can continue to work on a weapon until they max it out. What Living Room Games introduced was a time limit, that the talent itself has a duration. And that duration is that the bonus lasts for a number of months equal to the adept's rank in Forgeblade at the time that they use the talent. If they use it again while a bonus is in effect, then that basically extends the duration for another period of time. So let's say you have it at rank 2, you use it, you get a +1 bonus for 2 months. As you get towards the end of the 2 months, you use it again to get another +1 that extends it another 2 months. And that basically it kind of, in theory, spaces out the whatever.
Yeah.
I think this is a good idea, because what you end up with is a situation where having an army equipped with weapons that have a damage bonus kind of makes, for a power like Thrall, kind of makes sense, because they have a troop of weaponsmiths at their beck and call that they can have to more or less be regularly working on the weapons.
Yeah.
But you're not going to see a situation where a weapon, a Thrallic army weapon that is found out in the wilderness because it's, especially if it had been lost for a while, is going to be as awesome because the enchantments that provided the damage bonus that it has might have worn off. Okay?
Yeah.
So it introduced that. The problem that I have with the duration that they introduced is that it's kind of fiddly. Is that you need to know, in theory, like, probably this is something you're only going to be keeping track of for the player character's weapons rather than NPC weapons. But you need to, in theory, know the rank of the weaponsmith who's working on it, and you need to keep track of when they do it, and there's a lot more time tracking that's involved there. And you need to, like, it's all kind of fiddly with, the number of months, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's a good idea that just didn't quite meet the execution point, just because of the amount of fiddly record keeping that is required to kind of keep track of it the way that I think it's intended.
Yeah.
So, but it does kind of address the situation of, well, why isn't there this basically glut of really high damage but otherwise normal weapons flooding the province of Barsay? Because the enhancements wear out after time.
Yeah.
So that's the situation there.
So they had their own little take on it, which is not overly bad.
Which was basically, we'll kind of keep it more or less as it is. The rules in second edition, by the way, don't address the thread item question at all. So in theory, as written, you could go back and say, the forge weapon, forge blade can be used on thread items the same way it can be used on other stuff. And the potential disparity between regular weapons and thread items kind of goes away.
Yeah.
Because that disparity is one of the driving philosophical discussions of Earthdawn.
Yeah.
So then we get into Classic Edition, which Forge Weapon, Forge Blade was doing a lot of heavy lifting in Classic. In addition to
long list of
it's a big thing. That basically one of the things that we did with Forge Weapon in Classic was, because I was on the team sort of trying to work that stuff out, was we changed some of the difficulty numbers. We like did a lot of kind of fiddling and tweaking, but also included like new rules for how Forge Blade could be used to actually craft items from scratch, as opposed to just being an enhancement.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not going to get into the crafting side of things. I'm just talking about enhancements here.
We're already in the weeds enough. Let's not go.
We're already into the weeds enough.
Don't need a sand trap too.
Classic changed the amount of time needed to work on an item to be a number of days equal to the size of the weapon. So smaller weapons, daggers, short swords, and things like that would not take as long to improve as broadswords, two-handed swords, great axes, whatever.
Yada, yada, yada.
Okay?
Yeah.
The larger the weapon, the more time it took to work on. And because I think the cost for doing it might have been, that's one thing I didn't actually take notes on, was based on how many days it took. It was actually even cheaper to get smaller weapons forged than it was big ones. The difficulty number was equal to the weapon's damage step plus 9. The reason that this was done was because we basically calculated, well, what is a typical weaponsmith going to have as their steps?
Mm-hmm.
And what do we want to set the odds of them succeeding against a thing are, right? The idea being that a weaponsmith who has just a rank 1 in Forge Blade is probably not going to be working on making big, heavy, elaborate weapons. They're going to be making smaller stuff, daggers, knives, that sort of thing.
So forth. Yeah.
But assuming that a weaponsmith is going to have a step 6 or 7 in their attribute associated with the talent, they're likely going to be spending a point of karma on it. You know, a difficulty number of 10 for a dagger for a first circle weaponsmith is actually not going to be that difficult for them to pull off.
But just tricky enough.
Yeah, but this was basically what should the difficulty be? And this is tied in a little bit to the numbers that we were coming up with for creating weapons as well, which is why things are where they are. But it's basically, let's make the difficulty number a little bit higher. Let's base it off of what we think the odds of success should be for someone who is specialized in that trying to do this thing at a certain point. I think that was a little bit too much fiddly math on our part on the back end. It wasn't anything that would come up at the table.
Yeah.
But I think I think we got a little bit into the mathematical weeds on that one.
It was some legalese under Forge Blade. I mean, this thing takes up a column and a half.
Yeah, the Forge Blade rules, because it's a combination of the improvements and the crafting. Yes. There's just a lot of stuff in there.
And Forge Armor is no different. I mean, it's like trying to read a legal contract on how to use talent, 2 talents.
Yeah, I mean, the text is very, very similar. It's just basically like cut and paste for like armor values as opposed to damage and things like that.
Yeah.
The limit for Forge Blade in Classic, that is the maximum bonus that you could provide to any given weapon, was the lower of the weapon's base damage step or its size. The reason for that is because of the quarterstaff. Basically.
Yes.
Every weapon in the game, except for the quarterstaff, the size is smaller, is at least equal to or smaller than the weapon's base damage. Except for the quarterstaff, which is damage step 2, size 5.
Yep.
So basically the issue being, if we make the bonus, and so the bonus was made equal to size to further reduce the maximum damage cap that could be placed on any given weapon. So instead of a broadsword being able to cap out at 10, it could only cap out at 8 because it's a size 3 weapon. But a quarterstaff is its damage step 2. If we go and limit that by size, then suddenly it can get a plus 5 bonus to go up to a damage step 7.
Everyone's walking around with staffs.
Everyone's at that point. Everyone's walking around with staffs.
Yeah.
It's an edge case with a special rule written basically just to deal with that edge case. Again, mathematically, we really were getting into the weeds in that.
And quarterstaffs are one of the few, I think the only weapon that if you use that in a defensive stance combat option, you get a +1 to your physical defense.
That was something in some editions. I don't remember offhand whether it's in 4th or not. Anyway.
I know it's in Classic. That's all I know. But I'm going to stop right there.
And the duration, and we kept, in some respects, we kind of kept the duration idea that was introduced in 2nd edition, but standardized it that the duration was a year and a day.
Yeah.
Marked from the time that the forging was completed. It doesn't matter what rank the weaponsmith is. A year and a day is a
classic Earth Dawn thing.
It's a classic Earth Dawn time period. It's a lot easier to kind of keep track of in some regards, if you're keeping a campaign calendar and whatnot. And that's always measured from the date of the last forging. So you can also take a weapon to a weaponsmith to basically sort of renew that enchantment. It just requires you to kind of have upkeep on a weapon every once in a while. There was also a limit that the maximum... I didn't note that. I think Classic introduced the idea of the bonus being provided by the talent test being based on the results of the test. That if you rolled really well, that you would get multiple bonuses. No, it didn't. No, okay, sorry.
That's fine.
So it still only provided a +1 bonus. It does address the thread item question.
Aha.
Okay.
Hence the legalese of the page and a half of
it uses it rather than going against the item's mystic defense. We already talked about why that's a problem.
Yeah.
It goes against the weapon's base damage step plus any forge enhancements that it's received, but does not factor in any damage bonuses as a result of woven threads. Okay? So if you have a broadsword that has as a thread bonus a +1 to damage, but it hasn't had a forged blade done on it, it's difficulty 5, not 6 or 7 or whatever that thread enhanced damage might be.
Base step.
But it does require a good success as opposed to an average success. So it is still a little bit more difficult to enhance thread items. Yeah. The idea being that because there's a magical pattern there and Forged Blade is doing something magically to the item's pattern in order to provide the bonus damage, you need to be a little bit more careful that you're not going to screw it up. I don't think there's any penalty for failure except it not working. There's no chance of ruining it, but it's a little bit more difficult, easier than the excellent or better that was required in first edition, and also against the item's damage the same way you would any other weapon as opposed to the Mystic Defense. So it kind of addresses that. And again, you're still looking at so basically what ends up happening is that you can have thread items that ultimately, because they have additional damage bonuses provided by their thread ranks, will end up being higher damage than an equivalent mundane item. The broadsword is capped at 8. A threaded broadsword is capped at 8 plus whatever damage bonuses the item provides. Okay?
Yeah.
Addressing the question of, well, why would I use a thread item when I could get a
regular just forged item instead?
Random forged item. Because ultimately the thread item will do at least the same, if not more damage. Okay?
Yeah.
So that was Classic Edition. Again, talking about these changes that were made to try and address what various designers and players saw as the problems with previous versions of Forged Blade.
Yeah, because players, I can't see, are intentionally trying to break the game, but they're going to rules lawyer you to say, well, it says I can do this. I'm going to try and max it out.
I mean, it's not even rules lawyering. It's the fact that a weapon's damage is one of the most significant stats
in the
for
game.
A weapon in the game.
You do a lot of combat. You can hit a lot of things.
There's a lot of combat. You've got combat-focused disciplines. They're going to be looking to be as effective as they can, and the most obvious way to do that is to have your weapon doing as much additional damage as possible.
Yes. Fair.
All of that is I'm not blaming anybody for that approach. That makes absolutely perfect sense.
Exactly.
It's just that
we all want the most effective tool we can use.
that because there are different ways that gets approached, there are questions that arise.
Yeah. So this all sounds a little complicated, Josh. What can 4th edition do to maybe streamline this process?
We'll get there. First, we got to talk about 3rd edition.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right.
3rd
Didn't
edition.
Skip one.
3rd edition, which was kind of built off of Classic, kept some things the same, changed a couple of other things.
What?
It kept the amount of time it took to do it was the same. The number of days equal to the weapon size. So that didn't change.
That I like. That makes sense.
Difficulty numbers still equal to the weapon's damage step plus 9. That didn't change at all.
That streamlines things.
The maximum limit is equal to the weapon size. Basically, quarterstaffs ended up being the edge case that allowed a higher potential max damage. They got rid of the lower of size or damage. I was not really involved in that development, so I don't know why. I think it's just I think it's easier, and the edge case is not worth getting too upset about.
Stop splitting hairs.
Yeah. Like, quarterstaffs are kind of seen in some ways as an iconic weapon in some regards. Just, if you want to fight with a quarterstaff instead of a sword, potentially you can kind of end up in roughly the same area that you are going to with a sword. A quarterstaff ends up at maximum damage step 7 under this, whereas a broadsword ends up at maximum damage step 8. They become a lot more equivalent. It takes a little bit more investment to get the quarterstaff there, but it's not broken overall. It just, if you want to fight with a staff, then you can
go for it.
Great.
Yeah.
The duration is kept a year and a day. So a lot of things are the same.
Streamlined. However,
not streamlined, but like not
sensible.
a lot of, there was the one notable change with 3rd edition is that you can no longer use Forge Blade, and this actually was the first edition where it was called Forge Weapon instead of Forge Blade. You can no longer use it on thread items.
Oh, there you go.
The reason for this is that at the first thread rank, all thread weapons provided the maximum allowable forge bonus as their rank 1 thing. The idea being that in order to enchant a weapon to make it a thread weapon, it needed to have had Forge Blade used on it in order to maximize its potential to open it up for enchantments.
Gotcha.
So, basically, once it becomes a thread item, those bonuses are rolled into that right from the beginning, so that rank 1 of a thread weapon, you're no longer looking at, well, the potential maximum damage that I can get with this thread sword, I won't hit the equivalent of what I can do with a mundane sword until I hit rank 5 with the thread. So I'm going to use this regular sword until I rank the, like, I think it's a little bit, again, kind of getting into the weeds of a solution in search of a problem kind of thing.
Fair.
I don't know, in all honesty, how much of a problem that actually was, but it's basically, okay, if you get a thread item right from rank 1, as soon as you weave that thread, it is equivalent to the best mundane weapon that you can get. That completely at that point solves any issues of, oh, well, will they use the weapon that has the higher damage bonus, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
You get that right from the beginning, and then everything else on top of that is gravy. That's fine, such as it is. I don't know.
It didn't wow you. How's that?
Well, I find it hard even today to put into words. It just rubs me the wrong way a little bit.
Okay.
It doesn't feel like a solution to the problem.
So the intent of that extra rule is where you have a.
Well, I'm not sure. Like, I think, again, I am kind of going off of vague recollections here from a decade ago.
That's
or
fine.
More at this point. I think it was one of these cases of a bunch of number crunchers, among which I count myself. I mean, I helped revise the classic version of it. I am
there you go.
Perfectly guilty of that in my own day.
Yeah.
I think it's a case of designers and developers who are very heavy theory crafters, which is to say they take a look at the numbers and run mental simulations or do comparisons and try to figure out what's going on. I mean, that's what we did, as I explained, that's what we did with the classic version.
Yeah.
We looked at, well, what are the steps that they're typically going to have? What does that make the odds of them success against various target numbers? Let's set the target numbers in that range so that they can succeed about as much as we expect them to.
Yeah.
Right?
A fair chance.
And so I think there is some more of that kind of crunchy design philosophy that's going on with 3rd edition, and seeing a potential problem that might not have actually really been there outside of very select circles, and devising a solution to a problem that a very small percentage of the player base might have actually had, which is fine. That happens. That's the kind of thing that goes on. So that was 3rd edition. But again, we're still, like, all of these previous versions, okay, go like from the 1.5 version where the limit on the maximum damage was added on in 1st edition, all the way through 2nd and classic and 3rd. It's all continuing to operate under the paradigm of there is a maximum bonus that we should provide to an item.
Yeah.
Right? There's only so much. There is a limit to how much additional damage this talent should do. Okay, now we arrive at 4th edition, 52 minutes into the episode.
The Crisis on Infinite Earths of Earth Dawn, which is we're going to clean up all this past continuity, simplify things, get rid of some stuff that doesn't work anymore.
So one of the things that I did as we were working on revisions for the 4th edition was to go back and look at talents and say, and especially ones that had seen a lot of changes over the years, like Forge Blade, Forge Weapon, and say, okay, what's going on here? What's the situation? And rolled it back to kind of equivalent to first edition, which is to say, it takes a little bit longer in terms of time.
Mm-hmm.
It is, regardless of the item now, a week basically of dedicated work, which is, I think, the most intensive of the time requirements to use the talent in order to get bonuses. It can, out of all of the versions, unless third did it, I didn't actually note that, can provide multiple bonuses on a single test, right? So if you get an average, if you get a single success, that's +1. Two successes gives you a +2, 3 successes gives you a +3, and so forth, up to a maximum bonus equal to the Adept's rank. So if you're at rank 2, even if you roll super duper high, you're not providing more than a +2.
Yeah, not more than your talent can provide.
The difficulty number is standardized across the board rather than being based on the weapon's base damage. Mm-hmm. It's just a flat 6 plus the number of Forge Blade enhancements. That is the case regardless of whether it is a standard item or a thread item. It does mean that lower base damage step weapons, daggers, short swords, dwarf swords, whatever, are a little bit more difficult to forge under the new system than they were under older systems. And higher damage step weapons like two-handed swords and stuff are a little bit easier. Not hugely. You're talking about like a couple of points. A little bit more in the case of the dagger, but whatever.
It's kind of flat that difficulty average.
Yeah, that difficulty progressively gets higher the higher the damage bonus provides. But we removed the damage cap limit. That now you can get as many bonuses as you can potentially stack on top of it, up to the however high you can get. So there's no longer a limit, and there's no special rules case for thread items. Thread items work in this regard for the talent the exact same way. Yeah. So thread items do provide whatever additional damage bonus they provide along with their, and the difficulty is that, like, if you have a sword that has not been forged but has 2+2 from thread bonuses, the difficulty to increase that is 7. The same way as it is if you have a mundane sword that has been forged twice up to a 7. They're both difficulty 7 to get to an 8 or a 9 or whatever the test result would end up being. So the difficulty numbers are the same regardless. So the question of why would I use a standard weapon or why would I use a thread weapon when a standard weapon can deal more damage? Well, the difficulty of bringing that thread weapon up to the equivalent damage step of the mundane weapon is the same.
Yeah.
Regardless. In fact, it's in some ways maybe a little bit easier because you might be able to get some bonuses out of the thread ranks and might not need to pay a third-party weaponsmith silver to get those bonuses the way that you would have with a mundane. So that has been kind of balanced out. And no special case there. We kept the duration for a year and a day because I think part of the setting warping capability of the damage steps and whatnot that could come about, like we talked about with the Throlic army, gets solved to a large extent with the duration.
Yes.
The thing that basically informed that choice is the consideration of, well, but people then go, well, but then you can just get a 12th circle weaponsmith to provide +12, blah, blah, blah. How many 12th circle weaponsmiths actually are there? If the limit is the Adept's rank, we've talked about, I don't know whether you've talked about it on this show, but I certainly wrote a blog post and have referenced it on this show about Adept populations.
Yes.
How many weaponsmiths are there with rank 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 15
talents?
How many of them actually are there that would be able to provide those redonkulously high damage bonuses, onto items? There actually aren't that many.
No,
and so
from 5 and 6 and retire.
So from the setting consideration standpoint, and because the bonus is maxed by the weaponsmith's rank, and it can be maintained, but only at the limit of a particular weaponsmith's rank. So if you have a sword that somehow got up to a +8, but its bonuses are wearing out, the forge bonuses are wearing out, and the only weaponsmith that you can find is one who's only rank 4, you're going to potentially lose 4 of them.
Yeah.
That unless you have a really high circle weaponsmith who is able to continue to maintain those high bonuses, they're going to eventually go away. And so seeing that most weapons are probably going to end up with around a 3 or a 4 or a 5, that because the vast majority of weaponsmiths that are out there in the world are novices and journeymen.
Mm-hmm.
The practical reality in the setting is that you're not actually going to have a whole bunch of swords with +8, +9, +10 damage bonuses running around, because there just aren't enough weaponsmiths and enough hours in the day to maintain them.
And if you find one after you found it, you'd better be within, day 1 or 2 or 3, because after, 366 days, it's toast. It's back to normal.
Right. But there's nothing that prevents you from then, like, finding a high circle weaponsmith to eventually forge it back up to that point. Like, basically, it's, with some of the other things that were done, just in terms of the way that the number scaling worked, is that just basically the, ranks, like, that the attack damage steps and so forth kind of continue to go up because of the talents that and bonuses and so forth to adepts and creatures and so forth, that their defense ratings continue to kind of scale up and everything. Damage should potentially scale up that same way.
Yeah.
We also completely divorced Forge Blade from crafting items.
Yes.
The way that we kind of tried to kludge it in Classic. That now weaponsmiths get a talent at first circle, which is basically make shit.
Craftsman.
The craftsman.
Yes.
They get it at first circle, and that's how they make stuff. The ability to make items, because the idea of using Forge Blade, the talent Forge Blade, as a way of making items from scratch was actually, I think, also introduced in the Adept's Way.
Yeah.
As a half magic ability, I think, for weaponsmiths. I think. I don't know whether it was Forge Blade or whether it was half magic. But Craftsman is basically like, hey, if you want to make swords from scratch, you want to make weapons from scratch, you use this ability that they get at first circle. If you want to improve them above and beyond their normal capabilities, then you use the Forge Blade talent.
It was half magic in the Adept's Way.
It was half magic in the Adept's Way?
To begin making small weapons such as knives and daggers, eventually graduating to full-size weapons such as broadswords. That was their half magic ability.
Right. And I think their circle capped what size weapon they could make.
I have the page.
Anyway, that's all. So part of the question that was posed in the guild Facebook group, and part of the question kind of prompted this whole
no cap on that. There was no circle cap on.
There was no limit.
Nope.
Okay, I thought there was. Anyway,
it was inferred, but not specifically stated as a number values. They began with small things on purpose. It was just leaned into, but not.
But part of what prompted this whole, okay, we're gonna spend an hour talking about Forge Blade and its history and why it got to where it is, was because questions of why did they make this change? I don't see how it fits into, if you're coming at it from a classic / 3rd edition situation where you're looking at Forge Blade having a very limited bonus that it can provide, and being a way, and especially 3rd edition, where the idea is that thread items, enchanted items, have that Forge Blade built into their rank 1 ability. Like, there is a certain paradigm that is created within that is just completely, we are approaching it from a very different paradigm in 4th edition.
Mm-hmm.
Which is to say that the crafting of an item and the improving of an item through Forge Weapon and the enchanting of an item, okay, that is to say, if you are deliberately making a thread weapon, those are in 3 separate buckets.
Rightfully so.
Rather than, I mean, if you want to kind of approach it from a different way, that's fine. But the reason that the choices were made the way they were for 4th edition was to go back and say, I don't think there was actually a problem with an open cap on damage if we institute a duration for how long that Forge Blade bonus lasts, and think about the actual realities of the setting to say, well, how likely is a 12th circle weaponsmith
to be found?
They are going to be commissioned by kings and nobles and high-ranking officers and generals and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Their skills are going to be in high demand, and they are going to fetch a pretty penny, and they are not going to, unless you do something special. I'm not even going to raise the idea of, well, what if you have a player character weaponsmith? Well, then when you start getting into those warden and master circles and you become a mover and shaker and you become a renowned
weaponsmith,
province-wide renowned adept.
Yeah.
You know, your circumstances are going to change, but a group of third circle characters is not going to wander into Thrall and be able to afford
money-wise
a plus 12 damage step broadsword made by the master smith of of whatever.
Yeah.
It's not gonna happen because there aren't that many weaponsmiths that skilled. They're consequently the amount of expertise and whatever means that they're going to be fetching a high price if you just calculate the numbers based on the suggested things in there. And it's not going to happen. A weapon that a legendary weaponsmith might have worked on and forged up to be a legendary item for their companion or for the great swordmaster who went and slew the horror that was blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. That sword, it certainly at this point has been more than a year and a day since that sword had been worked on by the weaponsmith. And so it might be a thread item that starts providing you some decent damage bonuses as part of that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not going to be, it's just basically like looking at the history of the talent and the problems and looking at the problems that it was ostensibly trying to solve and adding bits and pieces here all along the way, and having been involved myself in a lot of that discussion and playtesting and development all along there, it's going back and saying, okay, let's examine our base assumptions here and figure out what is actually necessary. Is the open damage cap actually a problem? Only if it's permanent.
Fair.
So let's no longer make it permanent. And then all of the other issues, I think, go away.
Fair. I don't see.
I mean, it's not perfect. I think.
Well, we've had 5 other versions that also were not perfect, but I think it's a continuity clearing. Simplification.
It's workable. It's fine. And again, I do not in any way want to diminish the work that previous designers and developers did on their various versions. And whatnot.
No, this is a hard talent to figure out.
Yeah,
it really is. Because
it's more or less, it's like, well, another solution is to just get rid of Forge Blade as a talent.
But then you have the reality of, we can make something sharper and faster and better. But you're like, I've been viewing it with Magic to make it better, and that's the whole point of the game. And why can't I do it on this thing?
Well, but I mean, when first edition kind of opened that door in the first place.
Yes.
And as I have said in other places, there were some limits to what I was comfortable doing.
Mm-hmm.
And getting rid of what is one of the defining talents of one of the more interesting disciplines in the game was certainly not one of them that I would have been comfortable doing 6 years ago.
Because that's what they're here for. Don't get rid of the main thing they're here for.
Well, I mean, there's potentially other stuff that they could do.
Yeah.
You could. Anyway, I won't go into.
But it's kind of hard to be a weaponsmith without actually smithing weapons to be better.
Well, so, I mean, you could look at saying, well, okay, there's the enhance whatever. Like, there's a high circle talent that they got in first edition that I think might still be around, where they can do a really quick but much shorter term damage bonus, and that could potentially be something that you just bring down, so that the damage bonus is something that is done. Maybe on a much more limited basis, on a much more temporary basis.
Yeah.
The idea is that you've got the weaponsmith. It's kind of playing into the D&D idea of weapons getting enhancement bonuses, to their damage.
Yeah.
And how does this happen? Well, there is a magical, there is a discipline that specializes in providing damage bonuses to weapons. I mean, among a whole bunch of other stuff, but that's one of their things. Like, it's, again, taking one of the classic D&D tropes and building a setting element for that to make sense.
Yes.
In a really cool world building kind of fashion.
So no, I think taking the setting element of how many weaponsmiths are that circle, can you find, can you afford?
Yeah.
Logistical problem needs to be there. and work that in for
it's
stats.
It's looking at, this is obviously, if you take it completely divorced from the setting, and you are not looking at, using the setting elements, those story elements as a guide to how it works, then that's a limit. That is certainly potentially a lot more broken. And there's a lot of, I think, guidance that needs to be offered to game masters on how to handle these sorts of things from a setting standpoint.
Fair. Well, I mean, and we've spent almost literally an hour covering all the iterations, how they affected players and the game itself and balance thereof, and then the development thereof. So this is the progression of foraging in an all-encompassing umbrella, foraging over time over the last 27 years for this game. And so I think it was the duration for a year and a day, I can't say is a standard Earth Dawn thing, but I just think that makes it more special to make it in line with other things that last a year and a day.
Just one of those, I mean, it's a fairly standard duration. It is less fiddly than, we need to know what rank the weaponsmith was when they did that and keep track of. And
a lot of 4th edition things have been less note-taking, less accounting, less crib sheet stuff. And that's a year and a day. Everybody knows that when you've played Earth Dawn for longer than 20 minutes. A year and a day is one of those really cool time periods. And so making it a weapon of sharpness last this long, year and a day, that makes sense. You're going to use it, but it's going to last that long. It's magically imbued. Quick note.
And you can continue that if you want to. Like, there's nothing.
Yeah. Quick little note. I did look up the quarterstaff in 4th edition. It still provides you a +1 bonus if taking a defensive stance. So, yay, quarterstaffs still kick ass.
Yeah, quarterstaffs are awesome.
They just are in general. So, if you have any questions brought up by this discussion, by this long-arching, long-reaching, convoluted way we got from point A to point, I think we're R, S, T now, something like that.
We're on beyond zebra.
We've hit numbers. We've gone to plaid. If you have any questions for us, feel free to contact us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. We hope this was the clarification discussion you've been looking for Forge Weapon that we've been teasing for the longest amount of time. So Happy New Year 2021. Any final thoughts that we didn't actually shoehorn into the last hour and plus?
No, I vomited enough of them onto the
onto listeners already.
Onto the digital tape here, the metaphorical tape.
Exactly.
For the past hour and change.
That's all right.
So no final thoughts except that I hope the new year finds you well.
Please stay safe.
Stay safe.
Please stay 6 feet apart.
We're clawing back daylight here in the Northern Hemisphere, and it looks like that light is actually the end of the tunnel and not an oncoming train. But there are still quite a few bits of track to get over before we get there.
There are cracks in everything, and that's how the light gets in. So, until next time, folks, you'll hear my lovely voice, whatever you may think of it, lovely or not, on some stories for y'all. And after that, we'll be back with both of us, talk about some other stuff. In the meantime, please email us. We'd love to hear from you, good or bad, staying safe or not, your trials and tribulations, your characters, your histories, and so forth. So until next time, it is time for you to go forge your own legend as high as you can.
Good night, everybody.